Welcome to Ranting and Raving. This week's episode is it's gonna be a fun one for me. So I am a huge I like sci-fi, but I'm really a huge fantasy buff. And I love reading. I read for fun. I always have. Uh, Probably the biggest fights I ever got with teachers in high school and in middle school was when I'd get bored in class, I'd pull out a book and read, and I'd get yelled at because I was disrespecting the teacher. And then because I didn't have something to occupy my time, I would talk, and all of my teachers but one figured out very quickly you'd much rather have Brian reading in class than talking in class. So, middle school, I pretty much made my way through the entire local library's fantasy section, continued on through high school. And since it's something that I've always had a love for, and I'm a big epic fantasy, big series guy. Like I read some one-off books, but really, I read a lot of multi-part series because I read pretty fast and pretty voraciously, and I like big epic stories. So this is gonna be my favorite. It's not the greatest because it's just so subjective, and some people are going to put books on that list that just frankly don't belong because it's their favorite. Um, and there just really isn't an objective way to rank the greatest fantasy books of all time, especially in that genre. Which we'll kind of get into why as we go through these. So I'm just going to be looking at my favorite fantasy books of all time. We're going to start here with some honorable mentions. We'll get to in a second. Um, Look, if you enjoy this content, I very much appreciate anybody who's willing to like, comment, or subscribe. It does help more people see the channel and its content. And if you don't like it, feel free to just comment and let me know why, or if you disagree with the list, or especially with a video like this one. If you have books of your own, books, comics, manga, kind of anything within this larger fantasy space. Chinese light novels. I read a lot of those. You can find them translated online. I love them. They're a ton of fun. There's actually a lot of manga and anime that are based off of them, but this isn't that video, and I'm sidebarring, so I'll try to stay on topic. But with all that said, this like I said, this is a book about my favorite, a video about my favorite fantasy books, and we're gonna get started, like I said, with the honorable mentions. So, obviously, many of these images were grabbed from the internet, as you can see here from the Lord of the Rings, the card game. But Lord of the Rings is the first honorable mention. So, the Lord of the Rings is on this list for two reasons. Number one, it probably is the iconic fantasy series. Um, you know, in the last 10 years, maybe some people would say Game of Thrones. I'm kind of iffy on whether or not that's great fantasy. That's probably a video in and of itself, especially the books, not the show. I'm not talking about the show, but the books. Um, but none of this exists without C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. And I've read actually most of Lewis's, or at least a number of Lewis's books as well, but I didn't enjoy them as much as the Lord of the Rings books, which I read. I think I read those in I want to say like sixth grade. Yeah, they were part of that fantasy section that I just mowed through as I proceeded to get my ass suspended over and over for being loud in class. Shocking, no one who's ever interacted with me ever. But anyway, the Lord of the Rings, like I said, it's super, super, super iconic. It is an honorable mention. They're not my favorite, and they're really not my favorite. Like I said, they're in the honorable mention for two reasons. One is because they're iconic, and I have read them. But two is because Lord of the Rings is death by exposition. I've always said, especially in fantasy, writing in general, but especially in fantasy, you have great writers and you have great storytellers, and it's really hard to find authors who are both, and that's okay. Because fantasy is about escapism, it's about magical worlds and the hero's journey, and it doesn't mean there aren't really in depth, well written, complicated plots, but it is about being tropey. Being tropey and predictable in fantasy isn't a bad thing. You're trying to give the reader what they're looking for. And this series in particular this trilogy because it's so iconic, but these books, help define a lot of what people are looking for. When you talk high fantasy, elves, dwarves, dragons, so on and so forth, this is kind of where it got its start. And well, that's great because, like I said, it's iconic. There's just way too much exposition. Tolkien will tell you, he will spend 6 pages telling you about the hair on the ass on the spider, clinging to the leg of the eagle, flying 6 miles above the party for absolutely no reason other than that he can. And that's the reason why it's an honorable mention for me. They're great books. They're iconic. They have a huge impact on the industry in so many different ways. The movies had a huge impact as well. Honestly, if those movies don't do as well as they did, I honestly, truly believe that things like the MCU, the Marvel Comic Universe, wouldn't have had the success they had. Nerd culture for a long time was not mainstream and not widely accepted. And these books and then the movies that came from them was a huge part of people going, oh, actually, this stuff is really cool. Maybe we should just enjoy the really cool stuff. Turns out, dragons are awesome. Who knew? And so they're definitely on the list. Another one on the list, kind of for the opposite reason, but on the honorable mention list here is the Harry Potter books. So clearly iconic. Many people in our generations, I had started reading fantasy books before I was introduced to Harry Potter, but not much before. And most people around my age, early 30s, some younger, and a few even a little bit older. Like this was your introduction to this world. They took the world by storm. J.K. Rowling's kind of a piece of shit human being, but that really doesn't detract from the books. And that's not why they're an honorable mention. It's really because I've used this for years and years and years when having this discussion with people. I really look at the Harry Potter series and the Lord of the Rings books as two opposite ends of the spectrum. I mentioned that earlier. You have great writers and great storytellers. Rowling's not a great writer. She's not even a good writer. She's actually kind of a bad, terrible writer. Like, again, this is within the context of the literally probably over 1,000 fantasy books that I've read. So I'm not saying like, hi, I got a B+ on my English paper in high school. I'm a better writer than J.K. Rowling. Well, no, but I could probably, off the top of my head, name 20 people who are far and away better writers than her. Like, it's not even remotely close. We're just talking the mechanics of writing, not just the written word, but the formatting, the structuring, the story, the depth, the complexity, all of those mechanical components. But what she was is an excellent storyteller. And here's the thing with stories. Great stories are told through the eyes of great characters. And great characters are great because you either can put them on a pedestal. Great characters are either what we would aspire to be, what we would fear to be, or what we can relate to. It's always going to be some combination of those three things when you look at great characters. And the Harry Potter character, the Hermione character, the Ron character, so many of the characters in her books are so relatable to people. You either have been those people or have met people like those people. It felt so familiar. That familiarity allowed you to become grounded within this fantastical world of magic. And it allowed especially people who hadn't, kind of established a foundation in these, magical worlds, to, because they have that place to relate from, because they have these characters to bind to, they accept the context of the universe and they can just enjoy a good story. And so I am going to put this one as an honorable mention, but I will also say this. The Harry Potter books, now this is personal opinion, but this is something I also kind of believe is an objective fact. They're massively overrated. Not by cultural impact, not by how much people have enjoyed them, but I've seen people call it the greatest book series ever. I've people call it the greatest fantasy series. And if you think this is the best that this genre has to offer, you just don't read enough, or you've just decided that the entire genre needs to be filtered through your nostalgia goggles. Um, Frankly, I think these books are the. This is not a ranking list. This is not a ranking video. But these would be dead last of all the series that I'm going to rank. And again, they're iconic. The storytelling is really good. Like they belong there for a reason. But I also do think it's overrated. And that's why it's an honorable mention. It's just not one of my favorites. Doesn't mean they're not very good. And then the last one here on my honorable mention list is the Inheritance series from Christopher Paolini. So this almost made the actual favorites list, and I won't go nearly as long into this one as I did into the first two. So the first book in this is Aragon. Which was written by a 16-year-old Christopher Paolini, self-published, got really, really popular, got really, really hot. He originally planned it as a trilogy, and then it actually ended up as I believe as a quartet. So he called it the Inheritance Cycle. So there's 4 books, and one of the worst movies that has ever been made to adapt any piece of material ever. They're incredibly tropey, which again, in this genre is not a bad thing. Tropey is good. A couple of the series we're going to cover here in a few minutes, unbelievably tropey. That's not a bad thing. It's like, you're getting a dessert and going, oh, wow, this is really sweet. Yeah, well, I kind of expected dessert to be sweet. Now, are there savory desserts? Yes, there are. But being sweet for a dessert is kind of what you expect and not a bad thing. You actually delivered exactly what I was looking for. Being tropey in fantasy, kind of the same thing. Are there dragons? Are there elves? Are there magic? Are there swords? Is there a main character? Probably a child of destiny in some way, shape, or form. Does it roughly follow the hero's journey? Yeah, pretty much. To a T? Hopefully not, but, fairly clearly. Is there a good antagonist? Actually, one of the great keys to writing fiction in general, but again, especially fantasy, you need a great antagonist. You must have the Lord of Darkness, the great evil, the big bad, Voldemort. You have to have these key elements to tell a great story, especially in this framework. And it has these. I actually really, really enjoyed the books, but I didn't enjoy them as much as everything else on the list, and honestly, it really would have been in the favorites, but that movie existed, and I saw it, and I can't burn those memories out, so it's really the movie's fault that they're here. So now let's go ahead and let's get into the favorites. So, and again, keep in mind, this is not in a hard order. So this is not like first one's my favorite or first one's my least favorite. It's roughly in an order, but these are just subjective. There's no objectivity here. These are what I loved. Hopefully some of you, if you haven't read these and you're interested in the genre, every one of these books that I'm going from, both the honorable mentions as well as the ones that are my actual favorites, I would love for you guys to get into them and read them and enjoy them as much as I did. So the first one I'm going to get into here is the Obsidian Trilogy. So these are by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory. There is actually a second trilogy by the same authors. I did not enjoy it nearly as much as I enjoyed the first. It wasn't necessarily bad, but it really wasn't remotely as good. I really, really enjoyed these 3. Very much a hero's journey, very much Dungeons and Dragons-ish, elves and dwarves, but some really interesting concepts. And this is going to be a theme, again, from my personal favorites. You're going to see all the way through here. I love good world building. I mentioned earlier, and this will be the last aside I really am going to talk about this series. I mentioned earlier I'm not a big fan of the Game of Thrones books as far as fantasy is concerned. I think it's remarkable and fantastic historical fiction. Um, but personal opinion, Martin sucks at writing magic. And a huge part of why he sucks at writing magic is because he doesn't understand one of the main keys to writing magic is understanding this very simple rule. Magic has rules. If Even if the rule is magic doesn't have rules, it's chaos magic, anything could happen. Okay, but you have to establish that because you are building a world. Whether and it's actually done in these books, it's the old magic. We don't know how it works. We're kind of figuring it out as we go. We have to find these things to make it work, which they do. And there's this concept of natural magic and high magic is very formulaic, and draw this circle and do this thing, and horn of a unicorn and this and that, and all of these components. And then the natural magic is more of an exchange with the forces of the the world, the universe, the world's will, so on and so forth. But it follows under a concept of equivalent exchange. I can do this thing, but I must pay this price. I can do this thing, but I'll have to do this task in order to receive this power. And so it creates a very interesting world, and there's very interesting dynamic. But it also does a great job of character building. And again, it's tropey, but the main character shows tremendous growth throughout the books, and the other characters also show growth throughout the books. And there's tragedy and characters that make you care about them, then have things happen to them. And there's a love story, and it's not horribly contrived and terrible. And there's some actual weight behind it, which is good. Now, this is more children's fantasy than it is like full-blown adult fantasy, and when we get into a couple of the later series here, we'll establish the difference. But it's adult enough, but at the end of the day, it's on my list because it's just flat out good fantasy. And I enjoyed reading it, I enjoyed the characters, I enjoyed the beginning, the middle, and the end. And that's kind of the point. It tells a damn good story with damn good characters in a format that I enjoy, so it made the list. The next one on the list here is, for the hardcore fantasy nerd, if Lord of the Rings is not the quintessential iconic source of high fantasy, then the Forgotten Realms universe is. And within the Forgotten Realms universe, which, by the way, Forgotten Realms is like literally where if you have friends who play D&D, there's a decent chance they play it somewhere within a Forgotten Realms campaign. Forgotten Realms books are basically D&D campaigns brought to life. They're awesome. But in particular, there is the Dragonlance series, and specifically to that, the War of the Lance. I forget how many books are in it. I think it's like 12, something like that. Forgetting exactly how many books are in it, though. This is something I read as a kid. I actually recently reread it. As an adult in my early 30s, I went and reread the whole series, and it held up. It still felt good. It still made me happy. I still enjoyed it. It's still tropey as all hell. There's two brothers. Brothers Majir, Roslin, and I forget the older brother, the bigger brother's name, but one's a warrior and one's a mage. There's this Tanis half-elven. There's all these characters that are just so incredibly tropey. And it really does sound like your friend's D&D campaign or your D&D campaign. But that's the point. It should sound like that. It should feel like that. It should evoke those feelings of familiarity because that's the goal here. The Dragonlance books specifically, although there are some books within the whole arc of Dragonlance that actually they get pretty heavy. Again, this is less children's fantasy than you might think. This is people getting bisected, heads getting cut off, entrails getting pulled out, people getting transfigured into things, gods rampaging, trying to restructure the entire known universe in under their control and obliterating entire species. Like fantasy is not fucking Hamtaro, okay? um, but it's still kind of children's-y in that it's the great warrior of justice and the children of light. Although Rosalind a little bit less so. Again, there's a lot of extended stuff with this, but I'm kind of just focusing specifically on the War of the Lance, which is awesome and fantastic and one of my favorite things that I've ever read. And then kind of again within the Forgotten Realms space. So this is where we're going to introduce a term here. So some of you are probably familiar with this term. Some of you are probably not. If you know what a Mary Sue is, that's great. If you don't know what a Mary Sue is, you can either Google it, you can listen. Drizzt Do'Urden is one of the biggest Mary Sue characters that have ever been conceived in the history of fantasy. And he's awesome. So the Drow, what's actually great with these books is the first 3 books, the Icewind Dale trilogy, came out first. This is written by R.A. Salvatore. Or Salvatore, I don't know how to pronounce it, doesn't matter. R.A., that guy. Written by those, the Icewind Dale trilogy happens first. So the Drow are generally creatures of chaos. They serve the chaos spider god Lolth. They they murder and kill and assassinate, and they're creature. They literally worship a god of chaos. So they do very chaotic things. Entropy is good to them. They want, there's no such thing as familial bonds and loyalty, and it's very selfish and self-serving. And then you have Drizzt, who's this weird random drow who is like this Palladian white knight of a character, as far as like literally his character. Pure-hearted, wants to do good, serves people, defend the weak from the strong. All of these things you would expect. Except that he's a drow. And not only is he a drow, he is a fucking martial god. Dual wields scimitars, borderline untouchable, could fight half an army on his own. Just a literal whirlwind of death. But he's the good guy. And it's really honestly this trilogy that actually puts this whole arc. There's like 20 of these books. I read all the way up through the War of Thousand Orcs. It's where Drizzt and Canterbury finally get together. If you've read the books, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, well, read the books and we can talk about it. I read all the way up through there, and then I just got distracted with other series, and I never caught back up. But for me, this is one of my all-time favorite characters, and specifically the Sojourn, I think, is the third one. I forget the name of the first book. There's an origin. He actually does an origin story for Drizzt. So he does the Icewind Dale trilogy, and then he does his origin story, and then he writes more books about him. But the origin story trilogy in particular, it's really some of the best fantasy writing you'll ever see anywhere. I don't care how tropey it is. It's fantastic. He makes Drizzt such a relatable, tragic, honorable, awesome character. Like I said, he's a total Mary Sue. He's this child of destiny, this weird outlier. He's got different colored eyes. His eyes are violet. He can see in the dark. He has ultraviolet vision. He's got white hair. He's preposterously talented at basically everything. Like he's a total Mary Sue. But again, in fantasy, that's not a bad thing. Like, if Harry was, like, not protected by 87,000 layers of plot armor and was half as good of wizard as Hermione is, and, like, you combined them into a super character, like, well, you'd basically just have Dumbledore there. Like, that's what he is. Like, but he's awesome. He's a really well-written character. I love these books. I recommend reading them, and you know what? If you have a kid, 10, 11 years old, and they're into fantasy, get them these books. And if you want suggestions, I'll happily shoot you links. Shoot a comment in the comment section. I love these books. They're really well written, and they're adult-ish, which is why I'm saying, 10, 11 years old. Okay, they've been on the internet, they've seen enough, they'll be fine. But anything younger than that, start them with Harry Potter or something in that tier of these are still pretty kiddie books until you get to like Goblet of Fire. And even then, they're still pretty kiddie books, honestly. Um, so I am, I am going to be honest here. This is my favorite series. Um, Jim Butcher's Codex of Valhalla. There are 6 books. This is my absolute favorite series, without question. World building, I've mentioned this before, is my favorite part of fantasy. It's escapism. It's a literal another world. He does a ton of research. He actually has another series which he's also really well known for. That honestly I forgot to put in my honorable mentions and really should have the Dresden File books. It's a wizard in modern day Chicago. They're excellent. They're fantastic books. They're phenomenal. Um, yeah, he's a wizard detective in Chicago. They're really really good. I'm an idiot for not including on the list. I've read so many books. It's hard to remember. I could have put Sanderson's Mistborn. There's a lot. But without question, these are my favorites. I actually really I've always struggled with being able to reread things. Because I have a pretty good memory, especially for things that I read, and I can't for a lot of stuff I can't get into it as much as I did the first time I read it, and I've reread these books end to end, this whole series end to end, probably 9 or 10 times. I love these books. The culture and the society is very much based on Rome. The world is like it's dangerous to ever say the world unique. Especially in fantasy, because nothing is unique in this genre, which again is part of the charm, but it's true. But it's pretty unique. I've seen something similar, but he did an amazing job of creating something that was his, with the concept of Furies, with the way the magic system works. But as I've mentioned at the beginning, this is a series driven by characters, and the whole message and point of these books is in a world where everyone has Furies. Everyone has access to these supernatural elemental forces that they can manipulate and channel at will. One kid doesn't have Furies, and he's the hero. And it is tropey, and parts are eventually predictable, but it's so well done and so well written and so well thought out that within the universe in which it occurs, it's actually plausible. There is a minimal amount of plot armor. There's some plot armor because, look, the hero dies in the first 4 minutes. 98% of shit if there's no plot armor. But it's actually pretty minimal. It's really well established, within the confines of the rules that he has created within the books. Some rules created to keep main character Kun alive, but that's okay. They're rules. They're told to us. He gives reasons why. He shouldn't have survived that. Here's the reason he survived it. Why didn't the bad guy kill him? Provided a plausible reason why. It's well thought out. It's well written. I love the characters. And just personally, I love really strong women in fantasy as well. I married a strong woman. Katai is a fucking badass. She's honest. Katai is probably like 40% of why this is my favorite books. She's just a perfect, female character right down the middle for me. She's awesome. She's fantastic. She's a complete badass. She's brilliant. She's funny. She's a smart ass. Like, she legitimately reminds me a lot of my wife. I'm gonna get hit for saying that later, but that's okay. It's true. But yeah, love these books. I could gush about them for hours, but I won't bore you with that. So I know these are my favorite fantasy books, and I know that some of you may be watching this and going, why the hell do I see Star Wars? That's science fiction. Is it really? Have you read the books? Have you watched the movies? Is it really? Do you really think it's fantasy? Let's just be real. It's fantasy that happens in space. But the Star Wars just collection as a whole, the extended universe in particular, KOTOR, the games, all of it, far more belongs in the fantasy genre than it does in science fiction. And that's part of why I love it. Specifically, though, to this trilogy, because the extended universe is massive, and there's some amazing stories told in it. It's really, really good. I enjoy it. Way better than those last three movies, which were trash. But this trilogy in particular, by Timothy Zahn. If you can't see the name there and it's blurred out, it's Timothy Zahn, Z-A-H-A-N. Z-A-H-N. I don't know why I added an A there. Idiot. Really, honestly, read these books. Read this trilogy. If you want a really, really, really good Star Wars trilogy. In fact, if you want what they should have chosen to do to follow up when they decided to make 3 more Star Wars books, is they should have just made these. It would have been a whole hell of a lot better. Great villains, great storytelling, again, great world building, further establishment and building on these iconic characters, Luke, Leia, Han. One of the better and more intimidating villains ever in Grand Admiral Thrawn, Selbuth. I'm probably butchering that name. I don't care. Is excellent. Mara Jade, super interesting character. Talon Karate, phenomenal character. It's like if Han was better. I'm kind of being hyperbolic there, but not entirely. He's a fantastic character. Just really, 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 really good. Excellent writing. Such a better sequel to the last movies 4, 5, 6, the original trilogy, than the crap we got given over the last couple of years. If you like Star Wars at all and you haven't read these books, I could not possibly recommend them more. They are phenomenal. And then we are getting close. I think we're in our last 1 or 2 here. So I kind of saved these 2 to the end because Codex of Valhalla is my favorite fantasy series ever. And I said this wasn't a ranking list, and it isn't. But if you asked me what is the greatest series of books in the fantasy genre, especially for me specifically, I love epic fantasy. The Malazan Book of the Fallen and the next entry, there's a constant war in my head between the two of which I would say to somebody, these are the greatest. And here's the reason why. These last 2, and I'm not saying some of the others don't have it. Salvatore is definitely more in the J.K. Rowling tremendous storyteller, not necessarily unbelievable writing quality. Jim Butcher is both, but the Codex of Valhalla books are still not as epic and just holy crap as these, although I think they're brilliantly and incredibly well written, and a ton of research was done. But anyway, Malazan Book of the Fallen is let me just put it like this. So I'm not somebody who I've never cried in a movie. I barely ever had my eyes water or even mist up in movies. That's actually because it's not because there aren't touching moments or I'm some Iron Man of Steel. It's just I'm very dissociative in elements of my personality, and I'm very good at maintaining a level of objectivity where even though I go, God, that was amazing and that was awesome, and I can enjoy and love the story, it's very difficult to get me so emotionally invested and to have a moment that I don't necessarily, that if you try to hit me with something I don't see coming, you won't get much of a reaction. But these books is one of the there's a moment in these books, it's one of the very, very, very few times where I had an involuntary emotional reaction to a scene or moment in a book or movie, and it wasn't because I didn't see it coming. It's because I saw what was about to happen, and it was so awesome and so epic and so cumulative and so badass, but also so frustrating in a good way, because I was about to lose something or someone in the scheme of things, but in the manner in which it happened was so well written and so perfect. I actually got emotional, which I was very pleased about. It's one of the very few times that's happened for me. Um, I will say this. So I believe there are 12 books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Let me say this for this series as well as for the next series. This is not a small undertaking. These books are the books are big. They're like they're not 300. There's like 4, 5, 600-page books. Small print, big thicko books, and there's 12 of them. This is epic fantasy. The payoff is worth it. The world building is extraordinary. The depth that is gone to. Let me put it like this: you'll be 8, 9, 10 books in. A character you haven't seen in 3 or 4 books will pop up, and you'll remember who they are without having to like look it up in a glossary. Although they do provide glossaries. Like the number of characters in these books is incredible, and they're memorable. So many different stories are told all at once, but it all comes together at the end. It all accumulates into a final moment. It all fits and makes sense. It's brilliant. Steven Erikson and IC Esselmont wrote these books together. The first one is called Gardens of the Moon, or Garden of the Moon, whichever it is. I think it's Garden of the Moon. I'm messing up my plurals and singulars today. I could not recommend this series enough if you're ready for that undertaking. I'll say it takes about 100 pages or so for the first book to kind of start building the world and get rolling and meaningful, important things to start happening. And then the series basically doesn't stop for 12 books. Not a ton of excessive exposition, not a ton of mystical mumbo jumbo that's difficult for the lay person who doesn't read tons and tons and tons of these books to keep up with, and even people who read tons and tons of these books sometimes they get a little too all up in their own business. Really, really, really incredible series. Weighty, meaty. Warning. This is adult fantasy. I was exposed to a lot as a kid, and I wasn't a mature kid, but I matured quickly as a kid, if you understand the distinction. I wouldn't have let 10, 11-year-old me read these. I read these when I was about, I want to say 16, 17 years old. And by then, I'd read so much fantasy, like, you're not going to surprise me with anything. But like I would not give these to someone before, like, maybe if they're ready for it and they're really into the genre, like freshman year of high school. Again, make your own choices. But that said, like, it's a great gift. It's a great way. I would not give this to somebody as their first read, like first introduction to the fantasy genre. But the Malazan Book of the Fallen is incredible. It's deep. It's dark, but not in a horrible way. The characters have depth. It's realistic. It gives such a special view into war, and war as a concept, and the sacrifices, and the relationships, and the purpose, while working in all of these gods and fallen gods and all of these other things. It really is phenomenal. And then the last book on here, recently made into a TV series, amazingly, actually a pretty damn good adaptation. And this is, like I said before, when I say what's the best, series that I've ever read, it comes between the Malazan Book of the Fallen and Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, which is iconic. Also, big old thicko books. 4, 5, 600 pages, small print. There's 13, 14 of them. The last 2 written by Brandon Sanderson after Robert Jordan passed. He was personally picked by Robert Jordan to finish, basically his life's work. Had 1.5 billion notes. Sanderson crushed it. He did a phenomenal job. You could tell he was writing it, but you could tell that he was finishing Jordan's work. Which is just a great, the best compliment I can give. He did a phenomenal job. They're fantastic. Again, another thing that I love with these books, again, I mentioned this before, I really like seeing strong women in fantasy. I don't mind a damsel in distress as long as it fits within the story and it's not super douchey the way that it's written. I guess is the way that I would put that. I just and it's there's elements of it being kind of a like, can we please just stop fucking writing women this way type thing, but it's really just more of, I find those types of characters extremely annoying. Like I find the Peabody whiny nasally hero like extremely annoying too. Like I just kind of hope those characters die and the real hero get like emerges and it's like, it was a fake out. 3 chapters of this asshole and then the real hero. Um, so yeah, I am not a fan at all of those, and I'm happy to say that there are no weak female characters in these books. They're actually complete badasses. There's a couple I don't like. I can't fucking stand Egwene. I hate her. She's obnoxious. She's an idiot. If you've read these books and you disagree, we can have it out in the comments section. You can tweet me at Kiru16. I will fight to the death. She is an idiot. She is arrogant. She is annoying. She's well intentioned, but she's a fucking idiot. I can't stand Egwene, but she's really well written. And I love Nynaeve, and I love Elaine and Avienda. God, I fucking love Avienda's character. She's so great. And Moraine's like the best character in the books. Like she really is. She's a badass, total fucking badass. Great characters. Obviously, Matt, Perrin, Rand, the main trio of characters from the Two Rivers. Elaine and or not Elaine, but Egwene and Nynaeve come from the same village too. There's actually a well-established reason for that. Again, good writing. This is another one of those cases where it's incredible storytelling, but it's also incredible writing. It's detailed. It's well thought out. There's not excessive exposition. Robert Jordan is weighs more towards the Tolkien-esque describes the scenery and the elements and just the general exposition a little bit more than is necessary than Esselman and Erickson do with the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, but it's a joy to read. It's not a chore. They're incredible books. The payoff is worth it. The characters are well written and well established, and they're real. The main character Rand goes through real trauma, and you see him try to deal with this trauma and not handle it in a healthy manner at all. And then you get to see the repercussions of him not handling this trauma in a healthy manner at all. And then through the relationships and the events that happen in the story, there's resolution. And eventually, of course, the payoffs at the end, however they may be, obviously not going to spoil this for anybody, but it is incredibly well written, incredibly well thought out, excellent, and I couldn't recommend this series more. Again, these are big, thick books. There's a lot of them. These last two were saved for last, partially because I really do think this is, it's up there on the absolute pinnacle of the genre. These series are, but they're also up there on the time investment that it takes to get into them. A lot of the other stuff that I put, these are things that even if you're reading for an hour a night, like you can get through them in a couple of months. And if you really sit down and really bang it out, like you can get through them in a few days. I've read a book in half a day, like for some of these before, easily. Not with the Wheel of Time or the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So that's my list. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope for anybody who watched this, I hope either this made you think fondly of books that you've read and enjoyed before, or gave you some things that you might want to try out. And again, if you want to ask questions about these, if you have your own submissions or ones you want to talk about or anything else, feel free to hop into the comments section. If you are listening to this in the podcast format, again, you can either go to the YouTube channel and comment there, or you can tweet to me at Kirus KRUUS16 Kirus16 on Twitter. I would love to chat about any of this. That's my personal. There is also the Ranting and Raving YouTube channel has its own Twitter account as well, which you can find on YouTube. Regardless of that, hope you enjoyed this. Hope this was fun for Annie and all of you who made through this list, and we'll talk to you guys next time.